Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see everyone here. Um, would everyone just, if possible, please feel free to throw on your camera for me. And if someone wants to volunteer and just pop themselves off mute to confirm that they can hear me and that you can see the screen as well, please.
Yep, positive on both those accounts, Jess.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, Trevor. How are you going? Hi, Margaret. Hi, Adrian. Thank you for coming along today. Well, yes. So thank you so much for coming along to our lunch water audit, our lunch leader today. Have been putting in a lot of work behind the scenes to get this little webinar up and running and this series running. So I'll just jump into some housekeeping stuff before I get too deep into the actual the workshop part of it. But this is our first webinar in a series of 3 for our farm water audit series, which is an adopted shorter take on our full day series, full day workshop that we did at the start of the year in February in Holbrook and Toomer. And is also the small sectionized version of the 2 face-to-faces full day workshops that will be running in March on the 5th and 6th and in next year as well. So the housekeeping for today is really simple. Pop your cameras on if you can. Oh, no worry, Marg, that's all good. But yeah, pop them on if you can. Feel free to ask questions using your microphone or through the chat function. I'll try to monitor it as best as I can. If you're not asking a question, I just ask that you popped on mute to save any feedback or anything like that. Fingers crossed you would have received a work booklet from me this morning in a PDF and a Microsoft Word format. If you've already printed that off, that is brilliant. If not, and you're happy to plug away on it on your Word document on your desktop, that is also fine. But we will be going through the first section, which is the example scenario. And we will be focusing on the first part, which is quantifying your on-farm requirements. So this session, of course, will be recorded so it can be sent back out to you guys. And it will also be used to help other project officers across the Southern New South Wales footprint who are also delivering these workshops. That is not to hinder you guys asking questions or participating in any way. Yes. Is there any questions on that side of housekeeping? No, that looks good to me. Perfect. So a little bit of information about the Farm Water Management Planning Project. So it's funded by the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund and it's supported by the Southern New South Wales Innovation Hub. And it's supported and sent, it is being distributed across the Southern New South Wales footprint by a series of awesome farming systems groups and Landcare organisations. Our goal for this project, obviously, is to help farmers and land managers prepare for drought and prepare for challenging dry situations. And by running our workshops and events, we want to help farmers build the awareness and skills that help them conduct farm water audits and make management decisions surrounding how they manage water on farm. So essentially, we want you to know your number, we want you to know your need, know your gap, and we want to be able to help you to develop a plan to enable better water security, increase water quality, and ultimately have the opportunity to maximise any opportunities that you have coming up in the future, whether that be increasing production or taking on adjustment or something along those lines. So as I mentioned, this is the first of 3. We're starting here on the 29th of October, doing part 1, quantifying your on-farm water requirements. In a fortnight's time, we'll reconvene on the 12th of November and we'll conduct part 2, which is estimating your tank and storage capacity. If you have registered and you have nominated, hopefully either this week or next week, I'll be sending out some farm water packs to those who have nominated, which will include a printed out copy of the work booklet that you're working on. It'll contain the sorry, it's not showing. The Ag Guide Farm Water booklet as well. It'll also include a dam deep measuring tool, which you can use to practically measure your dam depths, and some other fact sheets and resources to help you through the process. Of course, the third and final webinar in this series is part 3, calculating how long water will last, and that'll be on the 26th of November, same time, same place. You do need to register for each of those. So if you haven't already, please go back to the registration link and just make sure that you have popped that in. So, as I mentioned, some of the key resources that will help us along this process is, of course, going to be your farm water audit booklet, which I've sent out to you. And it comprises of 2 sections, one being the example scenario section, which we'll be working through during this process, and also a section for you to conduct your own farm water audit as well. So taking some time to consider your own drought strategy and implement your own numbers into this process so that you can have a understanding of how you might be sitting at this time in terms of your farm water, and also use that as a tool to implement when you're doing your planning. So it can help guide what different developments in terms of infrastructure or grazing decision making, other bits and pieces that you might be able to use it for. For preparing your drought plan or strategy, we really recommend that you have a look at the Local Land Services drought plan template. This is available online. You can easily Google it, but I also included a copy of it in your in the email that I sent out this morning with your work booklet. So have a look at that. It is a really simple template, which just really is just what you'd be doing on the back of an envelope. What stock do I have? What stock will I keep? How many of them? What am I going to do with them? What are my feed resources? What are my options? And of course, your New South Wales DPI Ag Guide Farm Water. All of the tables that you need to conduct your farm water audit throughout this series are included, in your work booklet. So for this session, don't stress if you haven't come into the office and picked up one of those practical handbooks. Don't stress if you haven't received it in the post either. But that everything you need is in your work booklet. So as I mentioned, in terms of using the work booklet, there's 2 parts of it. So of course, you've got the example scenario and we have the your data, essentially. Today, we'll be focusing on, obviously, section 1, the example scenario, and we'll be addressing part 1, quantifying farm water requirements for the example scenario. And this means that we'll be looking at parts 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. So this will be roughly about pages 3, 4, and 5 of your booklet. So that's pretty easy, I think. I hope. Is there any questions on that now? Perfect. So obviously we've already discussed it a little bit, but putting context around your farm water audit, we know waters are not an infinite resource on our properties. We know that during drought and during dry times is the period where our systems are going to feel the most stress. And ultimately, it's also when we as landholders and managers are also feeling stressed about it too. We have to make decisions about how we manage our livestock, and that might include reducing or changing our stocking rate, selling, feeding, or adjusting our livestock. So, as I said, before you conduct your farm water audit, have it sort of in the back of your mind of what your process will be when you're going into a drought or a challenging time. So preparing your farm water budget can be broken down into a few key stages. Today, we're going to be focusing on estimating your demand volumes. So how much water is needed, when and what for. And what we'll be going into in a later, when we do, I believe it is in part 3, we'll also be looking at evaporation, seepage, and loss of water to other animals too. In part 2, we'll be calculating current storage capacity, so how much water is needed, when and what for. And again, I've repeated that twice. I've stuffed up my slides. That's okay, we can't be perfect. We will also, of course, in part 3, be looking at estimating the remaining supply. So how long will that supply be reliable? And of course, we will be continuously monitoring the situation on farm. I'd like to acknowledge that these slides have also been adapted from the workshop that Peter Smith from Sapphire Irrigation has had developed for us at the start of the year. So some of the information that you'll see on these slides will be the same as what Peter has demonstrated in the past, and what you might see in future presentations too. So here is just a quick slide about some common conversions that you might come across while you're conducting your farm water audit. As I said, these conversions are also in your farm water audit workbook, and particularly for this session, we will probably, and it's if you want to, you'll be looking at the litres to megalitres conversion, if that's something that you would like to do to help your head get around the numbers a bit better. But as I said, this slide is also included in your workbook. So we'll get into the first part being for 1A, which is livestock requirements. So our livestock requirements will obviously vary a lot depending on the stock type, their class and condition. A growing cow is going, or a growing lactating cow, I should say, is going to consume a lot more water than a dry cow, and she's going to consume a lot more water than, say, a steer or a heifer. The same thing goes, of course, with your sheep, lambs, lactating animals, etc. Climatic conditions, so geographically where you sit, if you're in the eastern part where we are here, and conditions are a little bit cooler but can also be quite hot in summertime, or if you go further west and obviously conditions are a fair bit drier. You will also have variations in feed quality, which will induce animals to either drink less or eat more. And water quality as well. So if you have poorer water quality, they will often drink less and therefore they won't eat as much. We are really lucky today to have Linda on the line. She is from Local Land Services as a vet. And after we go through this section of the workshop, she will actually be providing a short presentation on water quality for livestock and some common things you'll see during a dry time. So your supply should always exceed your requirements. So you don't want to get caught short. You want to make sure that you have enough water to meet all of your needs, all of your livestock needs. And one way that you can do this is by ensuring that the infrastructure that you use on farm is livestock proof, or by using little tips and tricks for your reticulation systems as well. But we'll go into that part of livestock proofing your infrastructure, hopefully in an upcoming field day or a webinar that is yet to be set. So in the same vein, requirements of livestock in containment should be assessed separately to your regular farm water audit. And that is not necessarily covered in this series, but similar to the previous point, this will be explored hopefully in an upcoming field day in 2025 as well. So as we can see, our livestock requirements, again, in summertime vary depending on the stock class. After it gets above 32 degrees Celsius, though, we can actually expect that our livestock drinking requirements will increase up to 3 times more. All of the numbers that you see in any of the figures and tables throughout this process, these are averages and estimated figures. So you can take them with a little bit of grain of salt. They are taken from obviously the DPI Ag Guide Farm Water, which was published in 2012. So there may be new data that has come out that we haven't covered, but these are just the sort of parameters that we will be working in for this process. So as you can see, this is our table, which has come from page 125, table 27 of the Farm Water Ag Guide. And this, of course, as you can see, there's quite a range in which your livestock classes consume per day. And also, as you can see, the feed type or feed quality is coming into play there, as you have a bit of variation in terms of how much livestock drink between a grassland environment and, say, a saltbush environment that you might experience out west. So you can see that an adult dry sheep is almost consuming double the amount per day as her grassland or pasture counterpart. We can also see that lactating cows can consume, obviously, anywhere between 40 to 100 litres. And there's obviously our other variations down here as well. So for the purpose of our calculations today, this is the table that we'll be working on. But don't panic, I've included this on page 14 of your farm water audit booklet as well. So we also need to consider other animals, and while I haven't included any other animals in the example scenario, it's good to keep in mind, and this is some of the information that's taken directly from Peter's presentation as well. But it's interesting to see, obviously, we have obviously the livestock that we intend to farm on our property, but we also have critters that come in and out that we don't necessarily gain any production from, like our pests, which could be goats, pigs, kangaroos, even deer here in Holbrook and around the area as well. So it's interesting to see how much they also consume and how much of an impact that they have in your system. One thing that I paid attention to this morning when I was preparing these slides is that a 70 kilogram pig can consume as much as a dry cow, 70 litres a day. And I find that quite impressive to sit back and realise. So we won't have any other animals in our equation today, but it's just something to have at the front of mind. All right, so we're going to look at the first activity, which is going to be calculating or quantifying our livestock drinking requirements. This is our example scenario farm. So we're looking at a cattle property located here at Holbrook. It is a total size of 209 hectares. The house has 4 adult residents. Our garden / house area / lawn area is 0.2 hectares. We have 3 farm dams that we know are going to be reliable throughout our dry season. So we have got 2 squares and 1 rectangles. You can tell that I don't want to do the maths on a circle in the next session. We've also got a house tank. We've got 31 hectares sown to oats, and we've decided to retain 100 head of dry cows this season. So what we're going to be doing, obviously, to make the calculation, we're going to work off the assumption that our summer period is from October to March. And I think this season is a really good example of that being quite a realistic period of time, which is approximately 181 days. So for our calculation, to determine what our total daily water requirement for our livestock are, we're going to times the daily requirement per head by the number of stock and by the number of days. So I have the answers. You don't. Now you do. So in your work booklet, go to table 1. And what we're essentially writing out is that our livestock type are dry cows. We have 100 head of dry cattle. We're going to estimate that for this scenario, they are going to be consuming 98 litres per head. And that is for 181 days. That leaves us over that summer period knowing that our cattle, our 100 head of cattle, are going to drink 1,773,800 litres of water, which is also 1.78 megalitres of water. So that's quite a considerable amount of water that they are consuming during that summertime period. So we already know that to be able to sustain our 100 head of dry cattle, we need to have 1.78 megalitres of water on hand, and it needs to be good quality. I want to move on to 1B, which is your garden water requirements. So if you refer back to your plan, refer back to your workbook and our example scenario, our garden area is 0.2 hectares. So what we're going to do in this situation is to find our total required water for summer. We are going to times our daily water requirement in litres by the number of days in summer. And sorry, there's another error on that slide. By the garden area. So for this example, I've decided to work off, the basis that daily my garden area might require 20,000 litres per hectare per day, which may sound like a lot, but you remember we've only got 0.2 hectares. Here's our worked example. So 0.2 hectares, we need to times that by 20,000 litres and times that by 181 days. This means for the summer period, provided that we are watering our lawn or our garden area every day for that summer period, October to March, we need a total of 724,000 litres of water stored to be able to keep our garden alive and keep our significant others happy, make sure their rose bushes are going, and make sure the lawn looks good, because everyone loves a good looking lawn, even when it's dry. So that roughly rocks into a total of 0.74 megalitres of water for that summer period. You may choose, when you're doing your own audit, to adjust the daily water requirement. You might say 20,000 litres is way too much for my lawn. I might say that it only actually requires 10,000 litres to the hectare per day. You might also decide that you're not going to water it for every single day of that season, but we're going to work off 181 days for the purpose of these exercises. The next one that we're going to go through is the household water requirements. And what I have done for this example is I've cheated. I've used the easy table, which is table 11, which is on page 14 of your farm water audit workbook. And so I've used number 14, I've used table number 11 because it provides just an easy way of calculating your approximate household requirement for that summer period. So if you're looking at table 11 in your work booklet, we know from our from our example scenario that there are 4 adults who live on our farm. And looking at table 11, we know that litres per day in the household is approximately 340 litres. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put the number of residents into table number 4. We know our daily water requirement is 340 litres, and we know, obviously, that people are going to be living in the house all summer. So we're going to estimate that's 181 days. And what happens is, of course, we just times the daily water requirement by the number of days in summer, which is going to give us 61,540 litres of water that we need to meet our household needs in summertime. And just keep in mind that you don't need to times that by 4 because we have already gone to the column in that table provided in the Farm Water Ag Guide that says 4 residents. So we are only timesing the daily water requirement column by the number of days in summer to get our answer there. I didn't bother changing that one back to megalitres because that was a small enough number for me to work with. How are we going? Is everyone following along all right? Yep. Okay. Our general farm needs. So for this property, we know that we've got 31 hectares of oats, I believe we sowed. I should know. I wrote it. Yes,
Yep.
I believe we had 31. Thank you. So we know that we've got 31 hectares of oats. And we're just going to imagine that according to all of our chemical labels and stuff, we know that we need to apply a chemical, and that first application is at 100 litres of water per hectare, and the second application requires 70 litres per hectare. So what we are going to do, of course, is for spray 1, we are going to times 31 hectares by 100 litres. So for our first spray application, we know that we're going to use, or we're going to require, approximately 3,100 litres of water for that first application. For our second application, we know that it is going to require 70 litres of water per hectare. So once again, we times that by our crop area, which is 31 hectares, and this gives us a total water required per application of 2,170 litres. So for our spray time over the summer period for our oat crop, we now know that at a minimum, we need to have 5,270 litres of water on hand to conduct that spraying. So depending on where you are and depending on, what your summer management process is, you might like to have a firefighting reserve. I know up around Holbrook and up along the slopes as well, it's been, bush firefighting is pretty important in the summertime season because it is, we've had pretty bad experiences in the last few years. So what we want to ensure is that people are considering what you might actually need to have on hand to safely get through a fire season. The New South Wales Fire Service recommends that at least 10,000 litres per hectare is available to defend your property. So for this example, we're just going to work off the assumption that we just want to protect our house yard or our lawn area / garden, which is 0.2 hectares. So we're going to obviously substitute our 10,000 litres as the bare minimum that we know that we need to have on hand. We're going to times that by the home yard area, which is 0.2 hectares. So we know at least we need to have 2,000 litres of water stored during that period. And of course, you can store more, obviously, if you have the facilities for that and if you're willing to invest in that and if that's an area of importance for you. We have done, obviously, some farm visits and have been involved in some bushfire recovery projects where a lot of people have invested significantly to ensure that they have a lot more water in storage around their home yards to ensure that if we do have another bad fire season, that they are equipped to be able to, protect their homes. So it's really up to 10,000 is the minimum amount of water that they recommend. So we've actually, you wouldn't believe it, but we've just run through the whole part 1 of quantifying your farm water requirements already. So this is the summary of all of the sums that we've just quickly done. And if I've gotten something wrong, please shout out. I probably have. I don't know if I was in the right mindset putting it all together. I probably got something wrong. But in summary, we have worked on the assumption, of course, that October to March is our summer period. And this is approximately 181 days. We know that our livestock are going to consume through this period 1,773,800 litres of water. We know that our garden is going to require 724,000 litres. Our household is going to require 61,540 litres. Our general farm needs, being our spraying, is going to require 5,270 litres. And we know that for our firefighting reserves, we're going to need at least 2,000 litres of water. So our total summer water usage comes to 2,566,610 litres of water, or 2.57 megalitres of water. When we decide to divide that daily consumption, when we decide to divide the total summer consumption by the number of days across summer, we can estimate that across all of that usage, every day we're going to be using 14,180.17 litres of water on your farm across that summer period, October to March. So every day for 181 days, you're going to be using 14,000 litres of water. And that is just for this example. So after today, after we've wrapped up and after we've had Linda provide her short presentation on livestock water quality, you can go through with your drought strategy in mind. You can go through the part 1 section. You can go through section 2, part 1 of quantifying your farm water requirements on your own numbers. So consider, obviously, what livestock you're going to be keeping on, how many people are in your household, how big is your garden area, what crops do you have that you know that you need to get watered, what general farm use in terms of potentially spraying, drenching, plunge dipping, what management things do you require water for, and run your numbers. You use that time just to quickly duck down in the back of that section 2 of that farm water audit booklet to jot down your data so that you, when you come to session 2 of obviously calculating your storage, dam and tank capacity, you've got those numbers and you're ready to take on the next step. Perfect. So that wraps up your farm water audit process of part 1. As you can see, we have got part 2 coming up on the 12th of November, part 3 coming up on the 26th of November, and you should be able to register for any of those. They are all in. If you go to one, you'll be able to find a link to the next. So that is all me. Any questions, anyone, for me before I hand over to Linda for her presentation? No? Sounds good. Linda, take it away.
No worries. You've obviously done such a good job that nobody needed to ask any questions. So we'll see how I go. Now I'll just try and share my screen. How are we going there? Are we able to see that slide? Yes, beautiful. Rightio. So my name's Linda. I'm a district vet actually based over in Deniliquin, but we do have some LLS vets based over in Albury to cover the other end. They just weren't available today, so you get me. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of water quality and its impact on livestock, and this is based on a presentation that Eve Hall has put together. So you might not think of it that way, but interestingly, I saw recently that water is the second most important nutrient for stock. Oxygen obviously being the first. If you think about how long you can do without something, obviously you can't do very long without oxygen at all. And water is definitely something after that you need. And that's because, animals are made up of sort of 60 to 70% water, and water is critical for a lot of really basic cell functions. So digesting their food, regulating their body temperature, and also their production. So to be able to make that meat, that fiber, produce a lamb or a kid or a calf or milk. Now, obviously, I've picked different numbers here out of that table, but once again, remember that this is all dependent. So we've got here dry sheep is anywhere from 2 to 6 litres, but that obviously depends what they're eating, and the dry cow 35 to 80 litres. So unsurprisingly, water intake is directly linked to feed intake. So they actually did a study about this with some steers way back in 1970. Apologies for anyone who thinks 1970 is not way back. And they actually did an experiment and said, okay, if the steers were allowed to drink as much as they liked, how much do they eat? And if we actually restrict how much water they get, how does that impact their feed? And the less water they had access to, the less that they would eat. And that would obviously have that direct impact to how much production gain they would have, because if you're not eating, you're obviously not putting on weight. And it's not just quantity for water, quality is really important too. So when we talk about what makes up water quality, there's a lot of different factors that we use to come into that mix. So one is the palatability of the water. So, if the water tastes bad, the animals aren't going to be as likely to drink it. You also have a lot of other factors like the pH of the water. So the ideal range for livestock is between 6.5 and 8.5 for pH. If it's too acidic or too alkaline, it can actually cause dietary upsets in your stock. We've also got salinity. Now, interestingly, salinity will affect different classes of stock to different degrees. So poultry is actually the most susceptible to salinity in the water. They don't tolerate a high level of salinity at all, whereas adult sheep that aren't lactating are some of the more resilient to salinity. So they can put up with it much more than other species. And, so cows and pigs come in the middle there. There's also different issues you could have that affect quality, such as pollutants or contaminants, and the temperature of the water also plays a role as well. So when we're talking about pollutants to the water, this can be both fecal material. So once again, they've done a study. This one was in 2002. And unsurprisingly, the more manure that was in the water, the less of the water they drank. And obviously, the less water they drank, the less feed they took. So that's obviously something that you've got to consider, particularly in a dam situation where you might be having continuing contamination of the water. And chemical runoff is something to consider as well. So this is your insecticides and your pesticides, something that you might be spraying around the crops. Think about, is that actually going to end up in the water? And whether or not that actually has a health impact to the livestock, it could actually have a chemical residue impact. So you need to be thinking about that as well. Interestingly, it doesn't necessarily have to be a really major contaminant to the water to cause an effect. So it's well known that lambs hate dust on their water. It's a common problem in feedlot, and it's one of the reasons why troughs are cleaned so frequently. Because if you have that really fine layer of dust over the surface of a trough, often the lambs will refuse to drink it, and you'll need to clean that before that they will be interested. Now, temperature of the water is something that you may or may not have thought of. Now, this study on the screen here was done with cattle, but very similar outcomes are seen with sheep that were either British breeds, so they've come from a colder environment, versus merinos, which are more adapted to heat. So with your British breeds, so that's your things like your Herefords or your Angus, somewhere that came from a cold environment, they will drink more water when the water is cooler, so particularly below body temperature. As soon as you start to get higher temperatures of the water, those British breeds will drink less, and that will obviously affect how much they eat and how much they gain. Whereas that difference is not found to the more heat adapted, so your Brahman and your Bos Indicus type cattle or your merinos. So because we have a lot of those British breeds, that is something to keep in mind in our hot summer. Now, algae, I've put algae up here as a very general term because algae can mean a lot of different things. When we talk about algae, a lot of people will automatically think of blue-green algae, but not all species of algae are blue-green algae, and not all species of blue-green algae are toxic, and not all potentially toxic types of blue-green algae are always producing toxins. So you've got to sort of be aware of whether the algae is an issue or not. Like, it could just be a palatability issue. Like if the water is chock-a-block with algae, sometimes stock are not as keen to drink it. Particularly blue-green algae forms that scum over the top of the water. So they do not like to drink that if they have a choice, and it is often in the situations where they don't have a choice where you can get issues. Now, as I said, poisonings from blue-green algae is actually fairly rare, mainly because they don't like to drink the scum, but there are toxins in there that can affect stock. Now, there's a couple of different toxins depending on the actual type of algae. Some of them cause some liver damage, and you might end up with photosensitization, which is like a sunburn that can happen, or you may even get some species that cause neurotoxins. So that affects the nervous system, and that can cause death pretty quickly if that's an issue. The other thing to consider is if you do have an algal problem, like obviously if you have an uncontaminated source that you can give them access to, that's the obviously best thing to do. However, if you're considering treating like a dam or a trough for algae, you really need to think about how you're going to do that and allow time, because usually what happens when you kill algae, one of the things that will happen is if it does produce toxins, it will produce the toxins as it dies. So you can't assume that just because the algae is gone, the water is safe to drink straight away. The other thing you need to consider is what you've used to kill the algae. So if you're using something that has a copper base to it, you actually also need to be aware of the risk of copper toxicity, particularly in sheep, which may, after a few summers worth of heliotrope or having some cat head or Patterson's curse access, have a bit of damage to their liver, which makes them have issues storing copper, and copper toxicity becomes more likely. So you definitely don't want to be treating a thing full of algae and then suddenly putting stock in, because you could end up with other problems. The other things to consider are bacteria or toxins. So this could be from fecal material, could be from decaying animal carcasses or rotting organic matter. So this is something that can be an issue in dams, particularly as they start to dry out, or if pigs are using the edge of the dam as a bit of a mud wallow and contaminating it with urine. That can also cause things. So, you know, salmonella we see around here out west where I am not infrequently, whereas something like botulism is definitely a possibility, but it's not as common here as it is in some other areas. And lepto is something that can be spread by infected urine. So feral pigs can actually have be infected with lepto, and they have the same strain of lepto that cattle have. So you need to be aware of that if that is a possibility as well. Another thing to consider is parasites. So you can see on this map here that liver fluke is a known problem, both in this high rainfall area in the southeast here, but also all along the irrigation country. In the intermediate stages, liver fluke travel through and cause damage to the liver, which obviously has a production loss. But that really risky area that you think of for liver fluke is that sort of swampy, boggy area, whether that's an area that just doesn't dry out very well on your property, or whether you've got a leaking trough or something like that. You know, you often hear people talk about fluky areas. Well, the reason that you associate that sort of boggy area with liver fluke is because of the life cycle of the fluke itself. So one of the intermediate stages of the fluke is actually in a specific type of snail. So obviously you think of that swampy sort of environment as an area that snails quite like. And obviously you're going to have a fresh pick of grass there usually, because that's where the water is. So that will lure the stock in to come and eat, and then they will pick up the cysts that have been left there by the snails, thus completing the life cycle of the liver fluke. The other thing that you want to consider is the welfare of animals, particularly in the situation where it is a bit dry, your water source is a dam, and the dam level is reducing, because you tend to get that area on the edge of the dam, which is quite boggy. And in a situation where it's quite dry, where feed may be lacking, the energy of the animals might be decreasing. So they're sort of a little bit weaker. It's more difficult for them to get to the water. If they're getting stuck and not getting out, they can cause further contamination of the water, and you sort of have that ongoing cycle of issues with water source that's not treated very well. So some of the benefits of having thinking about how to manage your dams and having limited access of the stock to the dam edges, or using tanks and troughs, is basically, it comes back to that underlying principle of the more they drink, the more they eat, and the more they produce. So that in turn will help stop diseases, and also ensures that you have that nice, cool, clean, reliable water source, which isn't a risk to the stock, ready for them to drink. So that is the end of my presentation. I'll try and get out of here.
Thank you so much for that, Linda. That was wonderful. Well, I shouldn't say wonderful, because water quality is an interesting topic. But no, that was really valuable. Thank you so much for that. Marcus has a question that he's popped in the chat relating to algae. He says, all troughs grow algae. Is that generally a problem? We occasionally clean them by emptying them, scraping out the algae and refilling.
So usually that sort of algae that you're seeing growing sort of up the side of a trough is not usually any issue to the stock at all. If the trough gets absolutely packed, they may not be as interested in drinking from the trough, or, it might gum up your works in the trough a little bit. But yeah, doing exactly what you're doing, just cleaning them out, scraping them and refilling them is absolutely the best way to deal with that, and doesn't usually cause you any problems at all.
Awesome. Trevor, I saw that you were typing something in the chat. Did you have a question, or has it been answered?
No, I'm about to load a truck, and I thought it just pulled in, so I was just getting a little message to say, sorry, I've got to go, but it's not. It's gone up the lane next to us.
Oh, that's all good. All good. Easy. All right. Is there any other questions from anyone? Margaret, Jackie, Adrian, Marcus, any other questions? Because if that's it, then I would like to obviously thank everyone for coming along today, this lunchtime, and spending your lunchtime with us. I know it was probably a bit of a quick go through that farm water audit, but I will just throw it out there as well. Of course, as I mentioned, we do have the full day workshops coming back up in March next year. 5th and 6th, we'll have one in Holbrook, and then one probably up the slopes, either at Tumbarumba or Tooma. So just keep those marked if you're interested in coming back and doing a full day workshop with Peter Smith from Sapphire Irrigation. And hopefully we'll be able to tack on a farm dam visit as well. We are also in, thanks Paul, we also have the option, if you have any questions at any stage throughout doing your farm water audit process, or considering doing your farm water management plan, you are more than welcome to contact either contact me, because Kylie unfortunately is finishing up with us at the end of the year. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can help go through your farm water audit one-on-one, and I can also go through your farm water management plan one-on-one as well. Holbrook Landcare has the opportunity to help you do any maps that you may require. So we can do a elevation map for you. We can do a hydrological landscape map as well. We can do stream maps and different satellite maps as well as property and paddock mapping as well, to help you set out your farm, any infrastructure or development plans that you have with your farm in relating to your farm water system. So please feel free to reach out to me if any of that is an interest. And yes, look out for any upcoming field days that we will be having. They will be focusing on getting out on farm and having a look at some demonstration sites that we're establishing over the next couple of months. And it's just a great opportunity to go out and check out what people are doing on farm in terms of their water. I don't think I've missed anything. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up for today and I'll let you get back to your work week? Okay. All right. Well, if there's no further questions and stuff, guys, feel free to reach out to me anytime. My email is just jessarmstrong@holbrooklandcare.com. holbrooklandcare.org.au. I'll get it right eventually. Feel free to give me a bell. My mobile number is hopefully on the bottom of that email. I've just noticed that Marcus and Margaret didn't receive that though. So I will follow that up though. I might have someone's email spelt wrong. But okay, thank you very much, Linda. And yes, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, guys. See you later.